Imagine, just for a second, that you have a 6 to 7 year audition for your job.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds completely exhausting right off the bat.
Right. Like for over half a decade, you are just working yourself to the absolute bone. You're constantly being evaluated, constantly wondering if you're producing enough.
And knowing that your entire career trajectory basically hinges on one final verdict.
Exactly. But if you manage to pass this agonizing years-long audition, you are handed something that's almost, it's mythical in the modern workforce. You get a job from which you can almost never be fired.
Ultimate untouchable job security.
Yeah. So what do you do on day one of year 7? Like, do you immediately take a 6-month nap? Or do you finally start that wild, insanely ambitious project you've been dreaming of for years, but, we're just too terrified to attempt?
It's a scenario that seems almost alien, honestly, when you compare it to the standard corporate world.
Hmm.
But it represents one of the most fascinating high-stakes laboratories for human motivation that currently exists.
Which is exactly why you are here. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a massive new study by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover detailing how this exact extreme scenario,
Academic tenure.
right, academic tenure, how it radically alters human behavior, creativity, and productivity. And even if you don't work in a university, even if you are at a tech startup or, a corporate office, this touches on something really fundamental about how extreme incentives shape our minds.
Yeah, and the scale of the evidence we are looking at today is, well, it's what makes this so compelling. We are diving into the AARC dataset. It's a landmark study by Trajectories and colleagues from 2025.
And we aren't talking about a small sample size here.
Not at all. This dataset tracked over 12,000 U.S. tenure-track researchers across 15 different disciplines. And they didn't just take a quick snapshot either. They meticulously watched these scholars' output for 5 full years before they received tenure and then 5 full years after.
That is just a staggering amount of data to process. We are looking at a full decade of a person's life, analyzing their output before and after they cross this massive psychological finish line.
Right. It's an up or out probation followed by a lifetime guarantee.
It's wild.
It is. But to really understand the modern reality of those incentives, we have to look at the historical context first.
Okay, take us back.
So, the core concept of academic tenure, where a professor can essentially only be fired for extreme cause or, moral turpitude, or if the institution literally goes bankrupt.
Which is pretty rare.
Exactly. It was originally designed as a shield. It was meant to protect academic freedom. The goal was to ensure scholars could pursue highly controversial inquiries or challenge deeply established paradigms without the fear of political retaliation.
Or like getting fired because they upset a wealthy university donor or something.
Precisely. But over the decades, the function of that shield has really evolved. While it absolutely still protects intellectual freedom, the process of acquiring it has morphed. It's become this grueling, high-stakes sorting mechanism for universities.
Which brings us to the climb to get there. Because to understand what happens after the finish line, we first need to analyze the intense pressure cooker required to cross it.
And it is intense.
Yeah, looking at the source data, the pre-tenure period is defined by this massive, almost vertical spike in publication rates. The data shows this output rising incredibly fast, and it hits its absolute peak just like moments before the promotion decision is made.
It's a total sprint.
It honestly looks less like a natural career progression and more like someone sprinting to beat a ticking bomb.
Yeah, and the psychological toll of that sprint, it really cannot be overstated. Early career faculty are operating under sheer uncertainty. The evaluation criteria are often notoriously opaque.
Like, what are they actually being judged on?
Well, they might be told they need, quote, significant impact in their field. But what does that actually mean? Is it 5 papers? 10 papers? A book?
Right. It's just so vague.
And they are navigating disciplines where it might take 3 years for a single paper to go through peer review and finally get published. Yet their tenure clock is relentlessly ticking down.
And the margin for error is basically zero.
Precisely zero.
Yeah.
And it's really worth noting how sensitive this high-wire act is to external shocks. Like when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it magnified these underlying pressures so severely.
Oh, because laboratories shut down, right?
Exactly. Labs shut down, field research was canceled. It was so bad that universities across the board had to issue widespread tenure clock extensions.
Just to give them more time.
Yeah, but they didn't do it just out of generosity. They did it to keep the entire academic pipeline from completely collapsing under the strain.
Okay, let's unpack this weeding out idea for a second. Because the conventional wisdom I always hear is that this brutal probationary period is, well, it's a necessary evil.
That's the argument. Yeah.
Like, it's a screening device to find the people who have the grit to survive the gauntlet. But looking at this data, I have to ask, is it just a filter that catches the best people? Or is it a, quote, dynamic incentive that actively trains people to work in a specific, maybe compromised way?
Oh, that's a great point.
Because if you are forcing early career scholars to pump out safe, high-volume research just to hit a quota, are you actually making them better researchers or just better survivors?
This raises an important question, and it really gets to the absolute core of the dual nature of the tenure system. The data suggests it's doing both, but with incredibly steep trade-offs.
Okay, how so?
Well, on one side of the ledger, the system does successfully identify intrinsically motivated high performers. It proves that as a quality filter, it works. It selects individuals who possess the stamina and the drive to sustain really rigorous research.
Right, they can handle the heat.
Exactly. But on the other side of the ledger, that opacity and that ticking clock, it forces early career scholars into a defensive crouch. To survive the probation, they frequently have to sideline their most ambitious, high-risk ideas.
Because they need guaranteed hits.
Yes, they need those guaranteed hits to build their dossier quickly.
So the system might be temporarily suppressing the exact kind of groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting work it was ultimately designed to protect in the first place.
Exactly. They are playing it safe because they absolutely have to.
Wow. But then they cross the inflection point. The tenure committee votes yes, the provost signs off, and they get the golden ticket of lifetime job security.
The holy grail.
Right. So what happens on day 1 of year 7? The data reveals something that completely contradicts popular culture. The hustle doesn't disappear, but it profoundly fractures.
Yes, it does.
And it fractures entirely based on the physical, structural environment the scholar works in.
Yeah, the first thing this vast data set does is completely shatter the myth of the lazy tenured professor. We all know that cultural trope, right?
Oh, yeah. The idea that once scholars get tenure, they put their feet up on the desk, dust off 30-year-old lecture notes, and effectively just stop working.
Exactly. But the Tripodi study found that fewer than 2% of faculty cease producing research after their promotion.
2%? That's nothing.
It's tiny. In reality, many actually double their pre-tenure publication rates. They continue to publish actively, which proves the probation phase did correctly identify people with deep intrinsic motivation.
But as you mentioned earlier, the trajectory of that post-tenure output diverges incredibly sharply depending on the discipline.
Right.
When I was looking at this data, I was trying to picture the mechanics of it, and here's where it gets really interesting. The divergence creates 2 completely distinct patterns.
Let's hear them.
First, we have the rise and stabilize pattern. This happens in lab-based fields like biology, chemistry, physics, engineering. In these disciplines, the output hits that pre-tenure peak and just stays there. It hums along.
Makes sense.
But then we have the rise and fall pattern. In non-lab fields, think business, economics, math, sociology, history, the publication volume sees a very notable, measurable decline after tenure is granted. It made me think of the difference between a factory line and a solo artisan.
Oh, I like that. Walk me through that distinction.
Well, in a lab-based field, you have essentially built a well-oiled factory. You have postdocs running experiments, you have graduate students analyzing data, you have shared equipment.
Right, there's a whole team.
Exactly. The principal investigator, the tenured professor, is managing the factory. Even if they step back to think big picture for a month, the factory keeps humming, the papers keep getting written.
Yeah.
But a non-lab field is like a solo artisan. An economist or a mathematician's output relies almost entirely on their own daily, solitary cognitive effort. If they take a breath, if they stop typing for a month to read or conceptualize, the output immediately drops to 0.
That analogy perfectly captures the underlying mechanics at play here. In the lab, authorship and labor are distributed across a hierarchical team. The tenured professor sustains their high output through mentorship, grant writing, and managing that whole ecosystem. The solo artisan simply doesn't have that mechanical leverage.
They're just on their own.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of organizational strategy, this means institutional leaders cannot treat all their departments the same way.
Right. You can't just apply one rule to everybody.
Exactly. If you are a university provost looking at this data, you can easily justify continued massive infrastructure spending for your biology and chemistry labs. You buy the expensive mass spectrometers, you fund the postdocs, because you know that infrastructure translates directly into sustained post-tenure productivity.
But you can't just throw a bunch of microscopes and lab assistants at the sociology department and expect their output to magically stabilize.
Right, which is a mistake institutions often make when they try a one-size-fits-all metric for success. For the humanities and non-lab social sciences, leaders need entirely different structural interventions. Well, a post-tenure decline in publication volume for a historian doesn't mean the scholar is slacking off. It often means they are shifting their focus to write a massive, multi-year, definitive book.
Oh, I see. It's just a different type of output.
Exactly. Or it means they simply need a mechanism to maintain momentum without a lab team propping them up. They need structured research leaves, paid sabbaticals, or course buyouts to give them the large blocks of uninterrupted time that solitary deep think scholarship demands.
But, output volume, like the sheer number of papers, is really only half the story, isn't it?
Very true.
If the original historical purpose of tenure is to insulate people so they can tackle huge, controversial, or revolutionary ideas, we have to look at the kind of work being produced after that job security is achieved. Do they actually take bigger swings?
And what does the data say?
The data here is fascinating. It shows a massive shift toward novelty. Once faculty secure tenure, they start pursuing much higher risk exploratory research. They start combining atypical ideas that haven't traditionally been mixed before.
They venture into the unexplored domains of their fields. And this is where we see the system working exactly as it was originally intended.
Right.
The job security liberates them from the defensive crouch. They finally take the risks they couldn't afford to take when the clock was ticking.
It's freeing.
It is. However, there is a very significant, very ironic catch to this. This exploratory shift toward high novelty perfectly coincides with a measurable reduction in citation impact.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. They are doing more novel work. They're doing exactly what society and the universities supposedly want them to do, but they are getting cited less by their peers.
Yes. Initially, their citation metrics often drop. There are two mechanical reasons for this.
Okay.
First, novel inquiries inherently have much higher failure rates. When you combine atypical ideas, sometimes you make a stunning breakthrough, but a lot of times it just doesn't work out. It's a dead end.
That makes sense. What's the second reason?
Second, even when the work is a genuine breakthrough, truly novel work takes much longer to be digested, understood, and recognized by the broader academic field.
Oh, because it's too new.
Exactly. The mainstream consensus might not know what to do with a weird, boundary-pushing interdisciplinary paper for 5 or even 10 years.
Think about your own career for a second, whatever industry you're in. If you finally got ultimate, untouchable job security today, what would you do? Would you keep playing your greatest hits, like the safe, reliable stuff you know your boss loves, the stuff that guarantees you an easy end-of-year bonus?
It's tempting.
Right. Or would you try to write that weird experimental album that you've always wanted to make, even knowing it might completely flop with the critics for the first 5 years?
What's fascinating here is the strategic dilemma this creates for the individual researcher and, well, the massive paradox it creates for the institution.
But paradox.
Yeah, because the tenure system is explicitly built to foster the creation of that weird experimental album. But the standard academic metric for success, which is how many times your work is cited by other researchers, it actively punishes that exact risk-taking.
Wow.
A researcher might be swinging for the fences to find a cure for a disease or a completely new economic model, but their annual performance review might actually look worse on paper because their citation metrics have temporarily tanked.
So universities are caught in a major bind here. They have this data. They know they want bold exploration, but they definitely don't want to burn their people out pre-tenure, and they don't want to see productivity fall off a cliff post-tenure.
Right.
So how are top institutions actually engineering better environments to navigate this paradox? Let's dive into the solutions. If ambiguity is the real killer during the probationary period, how does a university fix that without just, babying hyper-smart researchers?
Well, you look at places like Northwestern University for a model on expectation setting.
Okay, what do?
They realize that the crushing anxiety of the pre-tenure period and the potential aimless drift of the post-tenure period both stem from a lack of clarity.
Makes sense.
So they implemented explicit rubrics and highly structured mentorship programs for both pre- and post-tenure faculty. They don't just say, quote, publish more.
It would be useless.
Exactly. They help faculty actively manage their research portfolios. They practically coach them on how to balance the exploitation of their established, safe research with the exploration of new, risky
Oh,
directions.
that's smart. It's treating them like professionals who need ongoing career development rather than just brains in jars left to figure it out alone.
Exactly.
But what about the fear of evaluation itself? The source mentions UC Berkeley using something called procedural justice in their post-tenure reviews. Now, procedural justice sounds a bit like HR jargon. What does that actually mean in practice?
In plain terms, procedural justice means ensuring the process of being evaluated feels fair, transparent, and supportive, rather than feeling like a trap.
A trap, yeah.
Usually the phrase post-tenure review sounds like a threat to a professor. It sounds like management trying to find a loophole to fire you.
Right, like they're building a case against you.
But Berkeley actively frames these reviews holistically around development. They use the review to ask, what structural support do you need to reach your next milestone?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, maybe the professor needs seed funding for a new idea or a course reduction to finish a book. It's about diagnosing needs, not punitive discipline.
That makes total sense. Now, going back to my solo artisan analogy, how do universities solve the artisan slump versus the factory line?
The structural investments just have to completely diverge. For the lab fields, the factories, MIT provides a perfect example.
Okay, what are they doing?
They have invested heavily in shared core facilities. We're talking massive, centralized genomics labs and high-performance computing clusters.
So the university just buys the big stuff.
Yes, this drastically reduces the individual financial burden for any single professor and allows them to sustain their factory output without having to constantly write grants just to buy basic equipment.
But for the non-lab fields, the solitary historians or mathematicians, building a giant genomics lab does absolutely nothing.
Exactly. So Stanford University takes a completely different approach for those fields. To combat the isolation of solitary work, they heavily fund writing groups, generous sabbaticals, and course reductions.
Oh, writing groups.
Yeah, by funding writing groups, they are essentially artificially engineering the community, the peer pressure, and the collaborative momentum that happens naturally in a biology lab and that forces solo artisans to maintain their rhythm.
That is brilliant. And what about funding the weird experimental album? Because standard grant agencies, like the government, are usually incredibly conservative, right? They want a guaranteed return on investment.
Oh, yeah, they aren't going to fund a wild, unproven theory.
Right. So how do they get money?
Well, that's why Harvard University explicitly tackles that funding gap. They created the Dean's Competitive Fund for Promising Scholarship. It is specifically designed to seed high-risk, high-reward projects that standard government agencies simply won't touch.
So the university acts almost like an angel investor.
Exactly. The university is stepping in to financially back the exploratory shift that tenure enables.
I love that. And finally, acknowledging that humans aren't robots, the University of Michigan has introduced flexible workloads. They allow faculty to negotiate multi-year plans, shifting their focus over time between deep research, heavy teaching, and administrative service.
Which is very realistic.
Yeah, it acknowledges that over a 30-year career, a person's energy and focus will naturally ebb and flow.
Definitely.
So what does this all mean? As we look at all these solutions, the source material brings up this concept of universities using continuous learning systems and bibliometric dashboards to monitor a faculty member's output in real time.
Yeah.
And I have to push back hard on this. Bibliometric dashboards, that just sounds dystopian. How do institutions use machine learning to track every paper and citation a professor produces without turning into a Big Brother surveillance state?
It's a fair concern.
Doesn't tracking their every move completely ruin the exact academic autonomy that tenure is supposed to protect?
It's a very fine line, for sure. And the risk of creating perverse incentives is incredibly high. If a dashboard is used as a blunt corporate instrument to demand more daily output, faculty will just game the system.
Oh, absolutely. They'll slice one brilliant paper into 3 mediocre ones just to make their dashboard look green.
Precisely. The key, as the research emphasizes, is that these data-driven insights must be totally transparent to the scholar, and they must be used for diagnosis, not punishment.
Okay, diagnosis.
Right. The predictive modeling shouldn't be used to catch people slacking. If an algorithm notices a brilliant researcher's output has flatlined for 2 years, the intervention shouldn't be a disciplinary meeting with the dean.
It should be a conversation about what broke in their system.
Right. It should prompt a question like, do you need bridge funding because a major grant fell through? Or are you stuck on a complex theoretical problem and need a semester off from teaching to crack it?
Oh, I see.
It's using data for empathy and structural scaffolding rather than surveillance.
Which really brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this massive deep dive. Tenure, despite all its flaws, despite the agonizing opacity and the immense pressure it puts on early career scholars, is not just a transactional endpoint, it is a creative catalyst.
Absolutely. The data unequivocally proves that when human beings are given ultimate job security, they do not simply stop working. They don't take a 30-year nap.
Right.
They will explore the unknown. They will take risks. But their ability to succeed in that exploration isn't just a matter of internal willpower. They require highly specific, customized structural support.
Whether that is a shared computing cluster for the data scientist or a quiet funded writing sabbatical for the philosopher.
Exactly. Tenure provides this psychological safety to innovate, but the institutions still have to build the scaffolding to make that innovation possible.
And this is where I want you to evaluate your own workplace. Look around at the metrics, the KPIs, and the structures in your specific industry. Does your company actually reward the long-term innovation they constantly claim to want in their mission statements?
It's a tough question for most companies.
It really is. Or are your quarterly performance reviews and OKRs designed to just keep you perpetually on a pre-tenure treadmill, endlessly pumping out safe, short-term wins, just so you can survive the next round of corporate layoffs?
It is a profound question for any knowledge worker. The study strongly suggests we need to recalibrate the psychological contract between employers and top-tier talent.
Recalibrate how?
We need to view employment not as a continuous, stressful transaction of immediate output for immediate pay, but as a long-term partnership that actually makes room for failure and exploration.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over. The source suggests tenure is a partnership, not a finish line. So, what if corporate America adopted a version of academic tenure for their most innovative thinkers?
That would be wild.
Imagine if a massive tech company or a top-tier creative agency identified their absolute best performers, put them through that grueling 6-year audition, and then offered them a 10-year fireproof contract.
Wow. No strings attached.
None. No fear of quarterly failure, no layoffs. Would that unprecedented level of psychological safety spark a multi-billion-dollar revolution of bold, world-changing ideas? Or would human nature, when removed from the academic bubble, just lead to a decade of very expensive complacency?
It's a huge gamble.
It is. But the data tells us the human drive to explore is incredibly real. But taking the leap into the unknown requires knowing with absolute certainty that someone will catch you if you fall.